Oil. Cheap oil has defined us, our economy, our nations, and our way of life. Everything centers around oil. Oil is even required to manufacture and install alternative energy. The U.S. alone has a fleet of about 210 million automobiles and light trucks. Because of cheap oil, more than half of the American population lives in the suburbs. Our fertilizers are made from natural gas. All commercial pesticides are made from petroleum. And the trucks that haul all of our goods all need oil. It never ends. Liquid fuels are the common denominator in all economies. It's not just the US that needs them, it's the world. 50% of our energy needs come from oil. Cheap oil is what makes the world's economy and our way of life. We live miles away from food, water, and work because of cheap oil. Cheap oil has become the cornerstone of our economy. How else would it be possible for Americans to import food, clothing, and many other goods from China, who's 12,000 miles away? In the 1990s, Chinese apple juice exported all the way over to the US actually forced many US juice companies to close, which also affected the farmers of apples. Now, even the apple farmers in the US fear that China will crush them in the fresh apple market. How is it possible that apple farmers 12,000 miles away in China could ever have an edge against local apple farmers in the States? 2 words: cheap oil. Now, in order to continue this lifestyle and globalization, the math is simple. The world needs to discover more oil and gas properties, and of course, produce more liquid fuels in order to keep up with demand. From 1995 to 2005, China increased usage of oil by 3.6 million barrels of oil per day. And looking at the US increase during the same time period, it was about the same. The US usage increased by roughly 3 million barrels per day. The biggest difference is that the US increased from 17.7 million barrels per day to 20.7 million barrels per day, an increase of 17%. China's demand increased by nearly 400%. 15 years ago, China was also a net exporter. Today, they are the second largest importer of crude oil, and they are the largest energy consumer overall as of 2011. China currently consumes 9 million barrels per day, but some experts are forecasting that by 2015, they will consume 15 million barrels of oil per day. This means that just from China alone, the world will need 6 million barrels more for each additional day in less than 4 years. Currently, the world uses about 85 million barrels per day, with the US using 20 million barrels. But do we have the oil in the ground to continue this global lifestyle? Yes and no. When it comes to oil, we are definitely not running out. However, we are running out of the cheap oil. It is a fact that every oil field on Earth has a beginning and an end. They all peak in production at some point in time. Now, even after an oil field peaks, there is still oil in the ground. It's just harder to get out. It's not the light, sweet crude sitting at the top. If you look at the United States, our first oil well was established in 1859 in Titus, Pennsylvania. We continued to increase our discoveries of oil until 1930, when the US peaked in discoveries. That's right, to this day, the #1 year for the discovery of oil in the US was 81 years ago, despite all of our new technologies. The scary part, of course, is what follows next. Despite being the largest producer in 1965, the US eventually saw peak oil production in 1970. Again, despite all of our advancements in extraction, the US in 1970 produced 9.6 million barrels per day. Today, we average around 5.5 million barrels per day. This, of course, is not an anomaly. In the last 10 years, we have seen 33 of the oil-producing regions peak in production. The world peaked in oil discoveries in 1964, a year that saw nearly 500 billion barrels of oil discovered. In 2010, discoveries had fallen below 100 billion barrels of oil. It's no wonder that every year in the last decade, the world has less and less oil exporters. In fact, in the next few years, Mexico, currently one of the largest exporters, will become an oil importer. The U.S. will lose its third largest supplier. Of the world's 4 super giant oil fields, 3 are officially in decline. However, many believe the 4th one is also in decline in Saudi Arabia. Mysteriously, oil reserves in Saudi Arabia have stayed about the same for decades. So either Saudi Arabia is lying or their oil fields are defying natural laws that all other oil fields have experienced. At the start of the Industrial Revolution, the world had a population of under 1 billion people. And now at the start of peak oil production, the world has grown to 7 billion people. If China, which currently has 1/10 of the amount of cars per capita compared to America, was to reach par with the US, we would need 7 more oil fields the size of Saudi Arabia's in order to meet that kind of demand. Currently, the government, which accounts for most of the wasted energy, is pushing for much more expensive alternative energies. However, even if the US wanted to currently replace just half of the oil we use per day, we would need 750 nuclear power plants. Today we have 104 and we live in a post-Japan tsunami world. Oil can also not be easily replaced, as it is also in fabric, toothbrushes, tires, insecticides, cosmetics, weed killers, paint, and tens of thousands of other everyday items. What about drill, baby, drill? Well, even if we were able to produce more, we are currently at a tipping point where global demand is about to overtake global inventory. Many oil producers are in political turmoil. Of course, NATO has already launched Operation Free Libya Oil. Saudi Arabia has stated that if oil prices rose too fast, that they would simply increase oil production. Recently, oil saw a run-up of $80 to $114, an increase of 42% in the matter of just a few months. It was disclosed later that Saudi Arabia cut production. WikiLeaks also disclosed an embassy cable that Saudi Arabia may have overstated their reserves by 300 billion barrels, and that they will peak in production, according to a Saudi official, in 2012. The confidential cables from the embassy also revealed that the U.S. feared that Saudi Arabia may not have enough reserves to prevent an oil crisis. In fact, even the U.S. Department of Energy admits that a chance exists that we may experience a decline of world liquid fuels production between 2011 and 2015. Crude oil is too intertwined into our lives to expect anything less than a total lifestyle change if we have truly peaked in cheap oil production. When looking at gas, 73% is the price of crude oil, 11% is taxes, 10% is refining, and 6% is for transporting it. FutureMoneyTrends.com is projecting an oil crisis this decade that will not only change our lifestyles radically, it will change our world, ending globalization and restoring local economies. Already we are seeing a massive exodus from the suburbs that are far from cities and work. What may have been a beautiful home in 2005 is now vacant, vandalized, and foreclosed. The drive until you qualify housing boom has left many areas devastated. What do you think will happen when gas is over $15 per gallon? Many Americans not only live miles away from grocery stores, but the grocery stores themselves receive food that may have been transported from across the globe. Not to mention that the logistics of harvesting the food also requires liquid energy. Soon, we believe not only gardens will be rising up in the US, but front yard vegetable gardens will replace grass and flowers. Remember, no one can deny peak discoveries, and soon no one will deny peak production. Those that take advantage of preparing now will not only survive the great energy shock, they can prepare and even prosper in the future. For more information on what you can do to prepare for the unprecedented energy crisis, please visit FutureMoneyTrends.com.